Hello and welcome to a episode of the Blue Fudge Enterprise Mobility Roundup podcast. Today I'm joined by Justin Griffith, who is the CEO, or sorry, you're the CTO from StayLinked, right?
CTO,
Yeah,
yes, the
not C. I'm
chief
about to get in trouble. And
technology
it's
officer. Yeah,
Griffith, not Griffin.
yeah, but I
Okay,
get
I
both.
made this
I'll answer to
mistake
both.
recently. Yeah, well, I
Yeah,
said it to somebody else, and like, who's Justin Griffin? I'm like, the
yeah.
guy, the giant lion
The
with the
sweater.
wings, with the
It's like, yeah,
sweater.
right, exactly. Yeah, it's the sweater guy. No, it's
Yeah.
funny. So I have an identical twin. I have, and he works for the company. And so I've been called the wrong name about half my life. So I'll just answer anything. Just shout,
You
hey,
guys still
you.
look the same?
Sort of, yeah. I mean, there's this weird process with identical twins where different environmental stuff affects. So we're the same genetically. Like you
Mhm.
test our kids and they will test as siblings, right? Kind of thing.
Interesting.
But
Yeah.
yeah, but yeah, it's weird. So like, but we have the exact same voice. So when he would answer the phone, for a while, I was the lead tech support person. And so people would call in and be like, hey, this is, Jeremy, thanks for calling StayLinked. And they'd say, yeah, I'd like to talk to Justin. And be like, okay, hang on, I'll transfer you. Hi, this is Justin. How can I help? And people would be like, what just did anything just happen? It's
The
just
same guys answering the phone, like pretending
yeah,
it's somebody
exactly.
else.
It's like, let me transfer
Okay.
you to my manager. Like, good day, Governor. Yeah, it's like,
Nice.
yeah.
And then so stay linked. Can you, for folks that are
Mm.
listening and don't know what you do and then think you're making chain link fences or whatever, can you
Yeah, right.
describe what
Yeah.
stay linked actually does and what you guys have been doing for the last I guess like 2 decades now, it feels like.
Yeah, yeah. So I'm 2 decades. This April will be 2 decades, and that's that. I got started with the company right as the StayLinked product became a thing. So the company's been around for 33 years, and we actually got our start doing server programming services and consulting. So we were fixing Y2K. No joke. We were those guys.
You're the ones that
And
fixed it. Thank you for fixing that
yeah,
up.
you're welcome. Yeah, all the planes stayed in the sky. You're welcome. Yeah. Um, no, and then immediately after that, because that work actually didn't dry up until 2003, which is a testament, I think, to technology, sort of our subject we're talking about here, is that just because people have to do something like fix Y2K does not mean they're going to fix it, right? Our final project dried up in 2003, and then we got started doing what we do now, which was making the StayLinked product. And StayLinked is a terminal emulation software. And terminal emulation is really interesting because the underlying language that terminal emulators speak is this protocol called Telnet. Telnet is one of the oldest computing protocols still in active use today, and it runs about 2/3 of all the warehouses in the world.
It's terrifying.
So it's absolutely. I mean, I make it, and I'm going like, this can't possibly be real. Um, but yeah, it was developed the same year we put a man on the moon, and it's still running most of the warehouses in the world today. So
We haven't put a man on the moon since then.
right, yeah. So we
Yeah.
peaked. Everybody peaked that year, and no. So it's interesting because uh, it has this feature about it that because it was developed in 1969, there wasn't a wireless for this type of communication. And so what StayLink did was we effectively rewrote the protocol for the modern era. And that started with just being able to use it effectively over wireless, because normally you would take a telnet connection out into a wireless environment like warehouse, and any interruption that would happen to this protocol, and it would kill the connection. And you'd have to restart whatever you were doing, and whatever you were in the middle of, you'd have to start over from scratch, and somebody would have to go into the system, clear all of that mess out. So we fixed that. We solved it by effectively rewriting the protocol for the modern age, right? But how we solved that that session persistence issue, the ability to keep the session going no matter what interruptions happen, actually ended up being a great architectural choice for implementing a lot of the new and modern technologies that people wanted to play with, like Android or like robots or beacons and sensors and all of that stuff. The architecture that we used to solve this very basic problem with Telnet gave people a foot in the door for being able to use these technologies, where these systems that run the 60, or 50 some odd year protocol, would have no context for. Like robots don't speak Telnet. It's like teaching robots to speak Latin, right? So
Robots don't. I mean, C-3PO,
yeah,
right?
robots.
Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, I bet they speak
yeah,
Latin.
he's got
They
the,
could probably teach him Latin.
he'd learn it.
I bet the
And
chatbot
just
could.
a bit about background on you. So I know you're currently CTO, StayLinked. You've been there a pretty
Right.
long time. Before then, I saw on your LinkedIn you went to Cal State Fullerton. Is that a
Yeah,
that,
yeah.
and
For a
I'm
totally
like,
unrelated subject. I
yeah,
went for international business. I was studying
that's
Japanese
that's
and
kind of like computers though, right? It's hard to
yeah, yeah.
understand, and
Totally, yeah,
yeah,
exactly. It's
probably.
complex
And
and
now you
yeah.
probably use that a lot because you're having to explain things to customers and using a lot of
Yeah,
those
yeah, yeah.
skills. That's
Yeah,
pretty
it's all
awesome.
about diplomacy.
And
Yeah.
are you your office? You guys are based out of California?
Yeah, Orange County, California.
Got
So,
it. And you don't have to say if you don't want. I know Putin's trying to figure out who all these people are, and you
right.
gotta worry about that a little bit these days.
Yeah,
But
right. Yeah, right.
yeah, I don't know if you saw the rumor on the QAnon message boards. They supposedly they replaced Tucker Carlson with a robot that will do anything for Fox News ratings.
Interesting. That's a theory.
Tucker
Okay.
Carlson, he's gonna be outside my house
Tech
today yelling at me. He's like,
technology. Yeah, yeah, technology's come a long way. Jeez.
oh my
Yeah.
goodness. So on the topic of robots, I know the framing for this. I wanted to hear your thoughts on, and I titled this the applicability of cutting edge technology with the enterprise worker, which is it's a mouthful, but I think
Yep.
one of the things that you and I have often talked about when we chatted is, robots, AR, VR, and I came up with 10 topics that I'm interested in hearing your opinion on of,
Okay.
where is it in the spectrum of, is it actually a thing or is it just some crap that Gartner's writing about that they're
Yeah,
trying to sell
right.
some white papers on? So,
Right, right.
I guess from a rating standpoint, well, one would be probably not in our lifetime. We're going to see it come to fruition for the enterprise worker, and then five will be, this is something that's going to be here this year or pretty
Yeah,
soon.
it's
So
imminent.
as you go through these, I'd like to hear your thoughts on where it is in that life cycle, and then
Sure.
also other just experiences and applicabilities you've seen along the way. So that's
Okay.
a little framing. The first one, and this one, it definitely frustrates me because I feel like I don't know if you have AT&T, but my phone stopped working last week when I was in
Yeah.
New York, trying to
Word.
get on trains up to
Same.
Connecticut and go somewhere, and I'm like,
Yeah.
I am like getting like a paper map out and trying to do like the subway map thing. It
Uh-huh.
was definitely difficult, but the first like technology I'd be interested in your opinion on is network technology. So 5G, internet, internet from the space, which I think is pretty cool. I have
Right.
some friends that have these now in their RVs, and
We
then
just
just
got one. We
you
just got
yeah,
Starlink in our
yeah,
office. Yeah.
yeah. And then like
Yeah.
ubiquitous internet in warehouses. Like what's your thoughts on where this is in the life cycles? And I'm assuming this is one that's probably getting closer to a 4 or 5, but how do you feel like this is for the enterprise end user?
I think it's a pretty specific use case. So I think it's imminent, definitely. I think all the major manufacturers are coming out with devices that support it in the right form factor, because mobile devices have supported, 3G and 4G and LTE and 5G and stuff for a while. But there are some very specific markets that have really needed this more than most. A lot of the private 5G narrative is around, hey, it's better than setting up your own infrastructure. And generally speaking, that's not entirely true. If you're starting from scratch and the world is your oyster, and I will say, this is true of most of the technologies that we're likely to talk about. Many of the narratives around technology kind of start from a place of, we're assuming you're starting from scratch. Right. And so if you're going to go through the process of implementing a WMS, then hooking up a lot of these technologies is no more effort than it takes to customize the WMS around what you do. 5G is kind of the same thing. If you have infrastructure today and it's not busted, are you likely to flip over to private 5G? Probably not. Right. But there are use cases like ports and yards and those kind of use cases, or hybrid environments where maybe you have a warehouse and a yard that you want to be able to cover, and
When
Wi-Fi
you,
is
when you say
not
yard, you
covered.
mean like shipping yards.
Yeah, a shipping
He's
yard
not talking
or
about me
yeah, or like
mowing my backyard. He's talking about these
right,
shipping
not that
yards
yard. Yeah, but like
they're
yeah,
like a
like
mile,
yeah,
two square
or
miles of
rail
cargo
yards or
containers. Yeah.
right, exactly. It's just big open space, right? And so it's
Yeah.
very tough to run networking in those environments effectively. So 5G is a great solution for that. And actually what we saw during COVID was we had a number of companies where they were receiving stock of things 6 months later and they're in retail and they can't sell the stuff for winter and summer, right? And so they have to send all this stuff for next year's cycle in the outlet stores, and they just need a place to put it. So they were popping up pop-up warehouses, and how they were doing that was with 5G, but they were doing it kind of the bubble gum and duct tape way with little MiFis at the dock doors and just receiving with those with a few devices. But there are a lot of companies that have seasonal work, right? So you'll have maybe like a manufacturer of personalized gifts where they make 90% of their year on Mother's Day and Valentine's Day, right? And so they need the infrastructure temporarily, and they need it rapidly, and they need it to perform. Those are great use cases. So I think it's a 4 or a 5 in specific markets, but as a great replacement for infrastructure as a whole, probably not.
I thought you were going to say Spirit Halloween,
Yes. Oh,
one of my
well,
favorite
them
stores.
too. Yeah, right.
I found
Right.
that
They're
I
just
was
waiting for stores to close so they can,
it's like I was actually in a very, very large retailer recently, and they had a
Hmm.
section, and it was in their DC, and it said Spirit Halloween. I'm like, what is that? They're like, oh, we do all the distribution for Spirit Halloween. I'm like, oh, that makes sense. And they were
Oh,
a huge clothing company that we've all shopped at. So I'm not gonna say names,
that's
but it
cool.
was very interesting that they're piggybacking on their extra volume that time of the year, because their typical peak is going to be the November through December,
Right.
which I thought was pretty interesting, or the school season. So
Yeah,
October is
right.
typically slow for them. All right, so the next technology, and I follow you on the LinkedIn. I'm a lurker on LinkedIn, so I've seen some of your posts, and I know you've had a couple interesting posts on AR, VR. I know you have the new Vision Pro, which
Yeah.
my kids tell me looks like some ski goggles with wires sticking out of it.
Yeah.
But I'd be interested in, for AR. I think VR is probably not really applicable to the end user that much, except for maybe training and some other things. But
Right.
the AR pieces are definitely really interesting. And I think I saw another picture is it the X-Real Air you had in a picture
Yes.
somewhere? Yeah,
Yeah.
or
Those are my
with the
go-tos.
beam.
Those
Got
are kind of
with
my
the beam.
babies,
So
my babies.
I would be
Yeah.
interested. Where do you think this is on the maturity scale? When do we think we'll start seeing actual people in warehouses, in stores, or logistics actually using AR devices?
Well, yeah. So there's a couple of aspects to this technology, right? AR gets thrown around a lot. VR gets thrown around a lot. Now we have spatial computing and things like that. But there's a couple of different platforms that sort of execute on that, right? Like we saw a couple of manufacturers come out with heads-up displays, right? And heads-up displays are just a screen kind of over one eye and just meant for a notification, right? It really isn't meant, or it's not particularly effective to kind of have it up in their face kind of the whole time. It's really meant to sort of give the next best step. And what people discovered when they started using it was that if you leave something in somebody's periphery, even if they know exactly what's on there, they will focus on that instead of walking, so they make silly mistakes like trip over cracks in the floor, things like that. Um, but that's a learning curve for the industry, and one of the biggest things, one of the biggest drags on technology in our industry, in warehousing, logistics, manufacturing, transportation, all of those things, is risk mitigation, right? So this is one of the more risky techs, right? A lot of the hardware that is capable of doing the legit spatial computing, like when you play with the Vision Pro, it's nuts because the fidelity that with which you see the world around you is really good. It's not perfect. It's not perfect. Like you walk and it does kind of feel like you're walking through water a little bit. Like it can bend and it can feel a little trippy. Um, so the fidelity kind of has to be perfect, or you're going to have a whole swath of the workforce that is going to get motion sick from that, right? And that just comes down to the platform that you're using to execute sort of the underlying technology. So for augmented reality or spatial computing, you'd have goggles, right? And that sort of takes over all of your view. And part of the drag of that technology is that, and I think I showed it in the video, you unplug that and you've got a blindfold on. And that's a huge, huge safety concern, right? Because it might not be the battery coming out, it could be the battery dying, or it could be a failure in the OS and then it reboots, which happens sometimes, not all the time. But a business is thinking, if this happens even one time, it could mean a huge lawsuit, or it could mean a huge loss of life. It could mean huge risk to the operation as a whole and to the users. And so that's sort of the framework that they operate from. So there are some modalities which I think are a little more likely. Heads-up display is a little more likely, as
When you
they
say
as
heads
they
up, you
sort
mean
of
actually the single heads up display in front of
think
you,
like
or more
think
further
like
out?
any screen in front of the eye, and there's a couple of different platforms for that, like the X Reels that I use on the daily. They actually
What do
have
you use them for? What's the use case you prefer them for?
basically a portable monitor. I use them instead of I don't carry around a laptop anymore. I put these glasses on, and there's two OLED screens in the glasses, but they're angled in a way and they're transparent that you can see through them, which I think is really important. It's a very, very basic kind of thing, but being able to see through whatever the display is sort of this huge barrier of viability to our environments, to our customers, where we find ourselves, right?
So where do you see this on the spectrum? Is it a 3 right now until they figure out how to make
Again,
it?
it really comes down to the use case. For training, VR is brilliant. And actually, one of the interesting things about automation and robots and all of that is a remote workforce. One of the struggles that robotics has is the decision making has to be perfect, and the environments have to be dead set for the robots to work perfectly. But if you could have a remote pilot for the bot, if the bot has arms and could be facilitated by a remote pilot, then VR has huge applications in our environment, because you aren't putting the VR goggles in the environment. They're just facilitating something else, right?
The guy sitting on his couch, like
Exactly.
everybody
Exactly.
playing Fortnite right now.
Absolutely. Yeah, I promise I'm working.
I could be at
Yeah.
work.
Right. Yeah, I
So
promise.
this is a good segue into topic 3, which is robots. And I feel like we were clowning on this at NRF about the robots are really good at taking the trash out.
Yeah, right. Yeah, dunnage.
What's
Right. Dunnage.
And I've actually seen some of the Boston Dynamics robots in DCs unloading trailers and you're actually using those, and it's like the one arm one that's on wheels, so it's actually
right. Yeah, the little segue.
Yeah, but it goes it has
Ostrich
a
thing.
camera, it sees something, it picks the box up and it puts it in the right spot, or puts it in the right conveyor belt, which up until then I've only seen it at NRF and Modex and all these shows. But what's your thoughts on robotics, and where is it on that life cycle? How ubiquitous is it going to be, or when is it going to be ubiquitous, if it ever is?
This is kind of a tough question. Robots are going to, automation as a whole is going to see a huge increase in market share. I don't think it's going to replace a lot of technologies wholesale. Sort of the narrative that was going on for a while was, we can't get workers, right? There's a drag on the ability to acquire a workforce. And so we're going to replace it with robots. But robots kind of aren't there yet. Humans are incredibly versatile, right? In that you could take the same human and, facilitated with some mechanical assistance, they could move a box as big as this thing, hundreds of them at a time, or they could move a refrigerator, right? Bots, that's a different story. You need a bot built to move a refrigerator, or a bot built to move little bits and pieces around at a time. So the flexibility that humans have is so far out in front of where robots are at the moment. The decision making that they can do, the I guess, how do I say this? The fault tolerance of humans is way better than where robots are right now.
A couple 100,000 years of evolution. You can't
right.
catch
Yeah,
up
it's
in
come a
50
long
years
way.
of,
Right. They can pick between the poisonous berries and the edible ones, kind of thing. And so that's
most of the time.
Yeah, most of the time. Yeah. Yeah. You learn quickly, right? So this is one of the things that I think kind of gets lost in a lot of the narrative. Automation is very powerful with a very fixed set of circumstances, right? And if you're starting from scratch, your chances of getting those fixed circumstances are very, very good. So if you take a robotics manufacturer, they go into a customer and they say, okay, we need the warehouse to be this shape, we need the shelves to be this high, right? And we need the stock laid out thusly, and our bots will go nuts on that, right? That's a great business proposition. And they do the statistics and say, this is 10,000% more efficient than a typical warehouse. But most people aren't starting from scratch, right? Most people are trying to overlay these technologies on top of an existing environment. And so they
Which,
walk into a customer and say, yeah, you could be 10,000% more efficient, but you got to start over. Just burn that warehouse down, rebuild it in our image, and then we will give you your 10,000%, which for one of the most risk adverse industries in the world,
yeah,
that's not happening, right? So many of these technologies, it kind of doesn't come down to the viability of the tech. It comes down to the politics of it. That's a non-starter for people who are very practically looking at their jobs. They're putting their job on the line to
got it.
make the bet for your 10,000% bot
So
proposition.
I'm gonna take one of the topics you just mentioned I had on the list here, and we'll hop into this one next, which
Yeah.
it's definitely related to humans, but I've seen this.
I'm not giving you a number on any of these. I'm sorry. So I'll
I
give bots I'll say a 2 on the expectations and maybe a 4 in the execution of it. Yeah.
They're really good at taking trash out.
Yeah. And they're great at dunnage. Yeah. Right.
So the next one, and I saw this, I think last year, the year before, but on your note around augmented humans, but exoskeletons or
Yeah.
human assistants. And I saw this, and there was a guy in the booth, and I think it was a Modex or Promat, and he's lifting something very heavy. And
Yeah.
I don't know if the guy went to the gym or a lot, but he didn't seem like somebody that could lift something that heavy.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I'm
Right.
guessing it was actually working. But and if you ever like what it was a movie I saw recently. I was watching Elysium with Matt Damon, where he gets this and
Oh,
he's
yeah.
just a ton stronger because he has cancer and he can't lift anything. But
Right.
where do you see, or where do you think you're going to see the exoskeleton or whatever that technology is called? Is that something that you think is going to be viable in the next 5 to 10 years?
Totally. I think this is one of the technologies that society is going to start adopting, mobility as a whole. For a while, it seemed like everybody was talking about millennials and their need for a graphic interface and all this stuff. And what about this coming generation of workforce? And what I think many people forgot was, like, you don't have all millennials today. You have who you've always had. And we actually have an aging workforce. And there's also there's so many more efficiencies and safety gains to be had by augmenting humans as a whole, augmenting their workflow, augmenting their capabilities, than trying to replace their capabilities wholesale. So if you could provide a safe way for humans to lift 200 pounds with no effort or something, do you need forklifts? Do you need, these environments that would normally need these big lumbering metal things running around may not need those anymore. But beyond that, just taking, people who would never be able to do that job and allowing them to do that job, even at a very basic level, opens up the workforce conversation all over again. If you could add, a whole nother swath of the population who couldn't do a lot of manual labor, could now work in those environments because they're being assisted. Like I liken this, one of the things I liked about the sort of dunnage use case of robots, right, was what we worked on is called Pet Robot, where instead of you pushing around the cart, the robot just follows you where you're going. And how much more efficient would that be? You don't have it guessing where you're going, right? You don't have it preempting or going to swarm technology and find the most efficient path. Just follow the user, because the only thing that sucks more than pushing a full cart around the warehouse is pushing a 7/8 full cart around the warehouse, right? So if you could have a robot doing those things, sometimes it's not even about strap on an exoskeleton, right? Just have
Yeah.
something drag the heavy thing behind me. It doesn't need to be attached to my body. So I think people are sort of waking up to that possibility of how could we augment what the humans are capable of doing, because the robots aren't quite there yet.
Yeah, I think
right?
also goes back to the safety thing you referred to earlier, is that, you want to keep your employees healthy and help them not get hurt.
Yeah,
Don't have them try to lift a 50-pound box, even though they can. Do that a bunch
right.
of times, eventually your back's gonna give out on you.
Right. Yeah. It's not meant to go forever, right? And so again, a lot of these things can live and die on politics. If the narrative is good for the business and that, okay, you are cutting your liability down, right? You don't have to invest a whole bunch of training and sign a bunch of documents saying, I understand this is manual labor and could deteriorate my back and all that, and sign on the dotted line. If you could preempt that by giving them these capabilities that in a way that doesn't wear them down, not only are you limiting your liability, but you're also increasing the longevity of that workforce that you're training to do that. So that's good for the business, and it's good for the worker who doesn't have to do the manual labor in the same way that they otherwise would have. Easier to recruit, right?
Yeah, yeah.
It's
And
yeah, it's just good all the way around.
your back is still good for the weekend when you're
Right.
done with your job.
Exactly.
So,
Right.
so, so the next technology, and I know I've seen you posting about this for probably 3 or 4 years on LinkedIn, is around 3D printing. And I
Ah,
know there's a
my
huge,
favorite.
there's such a wide like range of 3D printing like technology. He's going to show us something cool.
I'm
Um,
gonna
yeah,
get my
he's
3D printer and
one of his. I think you have like 20 of those though. Your
hold on.
wife probably.
Wait, hold on, wait. I got it. Go ahead. This is my
Oh my
3D printed
goodness, there it
guitar.
is. There it is. You
Go
got
ahead. You
um.
were saying?
So 3D printed technology.
Yes.
Other than Justin making awesome stuff, my kid actually he came home from a robotic class yesterday, and he goes, "My friends and I are going to start a business 3D printing stuff. What should we make?" And I'm like, "How about you start with all the game pieces for our board games you've lost over the last 10 years?"
Right.
He's like, "Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
that's a good idea. How much can I charge for us?" I'm like, "I don't know. It's cheap. Just make it cheaper than the board games." But
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
in the enterprise, where do you see, or are you seeing anybody using 3D printing, and where do you see it going for the enterprise workers or users? And what are the use cases there?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. This has a lot more applicability in manufacturing, right? Additive manufacturing and 3D printing and things like that. My general take on technology as a whole is that the trend is not toward a particular technology in general. The aggregate opinion I have about tech is that we are moving ever closer to easier and easier customization around whatever it is you want, right? However your business wants to run. Um, if you make a product, we're moving ever closer to being able to customize it to your size and your fit and the shape of your foot, for example. If you're 3D printing, if you can 3D print a shoe that is fit exactly to your customers, uh, that's the direction of tech. So I see 3D printing much more applicable to manufacturing as a whole than sort of any of the other use cases. And I think 3D printing saw a bunch of this going on. There was sort of this belief for a while, again, in the hype cycle, that everyone would have a 3D printer and you'd order a product and it wouldn't be delivered to you. The file would be delivered to your 3D printer and the product would print on your printer. Um, we're not anywhere near any of that. So I don't really see a huge applicability for kind of day-to-day efficiency gains in warehousing, logistics, transportation, and those things for 3D printers. But in manufacturing, I see huge applicability where there is customization involved, or where you have uh, kind of niche items that it doesn't make sense to set up a whole manufacturing line for. So it's making huge headway in things like appliance repair. You know, they'll actually you'll say something breaks in your dishwasher, the repair guy will have all the components and digital files and a 3D printer in his truck. And those used to be things that the manufacturer would have to make a run of and do estimates on how many they would need. And now they can be printed in real time with no waste, no, very little manufacturing cost for a couple of cents worth of plastic.
Yeah.
So I think, again, all
How
of these
far
things
out?
have their
How far does
promise.
that? Is it a I think a 3 or a 4, or is it going to be something we see in the next 24 months?
In manufacturing, it's happening now.
Okay.
You can order 3D printed shoes from people. You send them, a photo taken with your iPhone, and they will send you a shoe that is fit perfectly for you. You know,
Nice.
yeah, it's and that's also coming down to the materials. If you can print metal at home, that opens some doors, right? So there's a big push in the science and 3D printing around the material and how you could print that safely and cheaply with even the grade of printers that I have here in the office. They don't need to be run behind glass with safety
Yeah.
goggles.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I still haven't seen the metal printers yet. Everything's a metal cutter still, but
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah, yeah, right.
it,
No, it's
it, it
cool.
it'll
Yeah, there are a
happen.
couple of them.
Awesome. So
Yeah.
the next tech, and this is something I've been very impressed with in the last 3 years, is, and I'm just going to call this AI ML. But I feel like the rate of improvement has been exponential, and a lot of people are still not believers. I'm like, you look at the internet. And I read the internet. And I'm like, this 70%, 80% of the stuff I read, I can tell it's written by AI.
Yeah.
Pretty soon, I'm
Yeah.
not going to be able to tell. But right now, I
Yeah.
know like it is very, very, very heavily used for the office worker, the white collar worker, but
Yeah.
for people in the enterprise. And I think I saw it was Tom Bianculli last month at one of the Zebra conferences talking about how they're putting AI on the endpoints, and I think they're using
Yeah.
like Tiny Llama or one of the other smaller form factors for their or smaller engines, large language model engines. But where do you see AI for the applicability of end users in the enterprise?
I think, that was a great use case that Tom showcased at that event. I think it's really innovative. Um, this is one of those situations where it's actually been developing very steadily over the last number of years. We're seeing a huge amount of attention put on it because like ChatGPT hit, and then it kind of ran away with it, and everybody else is responding to that. So there's kind of an AI gold rush. But in a lot of cases, especially in the enterprise, it's kind of a solution in search of a problem. There are specific use cases where you can throw AI and machine learning to improve some things around processes. For the daily worker, for the efficiency that the daily worker could have, um, I I think we're still going to see there's a lot of drag on that. A lot of the systems, AI, machine learning, you take any technology, robotics, voice, all of that has to be hooked up to systems for a data source, right? And all of it has to be trained using a huge amount of data to get from the machine learning something valuable that you can give back to the end users. So, if you have a lot of data or you have a lot of just use case that you can feed to an AI, it will generally give you something valuable back. But there isn't sort of this ubiquitous problem in our environment yet that people can just drop AI in and solve like content creation has now,
Hmm.
right? Like if you want a picture, okay, you can throw AI at that and it will give you a picture that is fairly representative of reality. If you want content, I want an essay written, I want a book written, content creation, okay, it will give it to you. But we don't have that in our industry just yet where AI is going to solve it for us. I think AI will see a lot of, and we're kind of seeing that now. The founder of Pivotal, which is
Hmm.
a kind of development tracker product, he started a company that uses AI to help rewrite old COBOL applications. And even he was saying in the interview that he had, was talking about it's not a push button solution. AI is not going to rewrite this app for you. AI will find the consistency and you can build up from there. So I really see AI as kind of being this improvement technology. It's not a replacement technology for anything. It might make workers 20% more efficient because they can ask you questions and get feedback, but you haven't replaced the worker in doing that. You're augmenting what the worker can do.
Yeah, which I
So
think that's the problem with AI in general. Is just like, how do you? I always love there's a chess league where you're allowed to have AI supporting you in the
cool.
matches, which they get these guys the grandmasters, and then they get AI helping them. It's a
Yeah.
very fast paced game. So it's definitely, I think the augment is probably the right way to say. So would you say this is something we'll see more of in the next 2 years in for the
Yeah.
end users?
You don't have a choice.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's so hot right now. We're not gonna, you know, hear much else. But I think one of the things that will happen in our industry is one of the underlying technologies that supports all of these is data. And so there we can already see some of the narrative coming around about getting data back in a way that it can be centralized and parsed and, learnned from and then given back in a useful way.
Yeah.
Right. And
Building
I think
building the models from the data is important.
right, but that's where we're at. We're still at that phase of it because the data is so unique, it's so bespoke to each individual customer that even people running the exact same software on the same version, the data could look entirely different. And that's one of the things that makes implementing these technologies so difficult is that teaching AI what productivity means, that definition could change in 20 different ways to 20 different customers, right?
Yeah. You're
And
never gonna get the same answer twice. It's definitely
right,
every answer is a snowflake, which is
right.
good and bad.
Yeah, and the same is true of, implementing robots and navigation and all of that, is that will look totally different between 20 different customers because there is no standard, right?
Yeah.
Um, so
You,
yeah, I think that's
it's a 4 or 5. Got it.
yeah, it's a 4 or 5. Yeah.
Yeah. The next thing you touched on this briefly there when you were just covering some of the points about AI, but voice technology, and I used to get so frustrated. I have one of the voice assistants in my home, and I think I asked it
Yeah.
yesterday, "Will it snow this weekend?" And it responded with something to the effect of, "With the weekend's new album released March 20th." I'm like,
Yeah.
it's not
Yeah.
helpful. This is 2024. I've had you for like 8 years. You should be better by now. But
Yeah.
what's your thoughts on voice assistants or voice technology, specifically either AI assist or I know in the warehouse has been a lot of voice picking. Is that getting better? Is that getting improved at all?
It is and it isn't. I have a mixed relationship with voice, right? So voice, I think, is always one of those technologies that has a huge amount of potential. And it's like RFID or something. If done correctly, it has a huge amount of potential, but it is so bespoke to every customer. And then language is a kind of unique thing. We have so many languages, and then we have dialects, and we have accents, and we have slang, and we have all of these aspects where, um, yes, in a very specific set of circumstances, voice is the right way to go. But I think multimodal, having voice as an assistant, or as a mode with which you could do your job, I think it's helpful. It's just not the be all end all. And I do think a lot of these technologies get talked about as being the be all end all, as opposed to saying what we actually need is 10% voice and 20% robots and, an exoskeleton in this use case and an AR in this use case. It doesn't usually get talked about as augmenting,
Mhm.
right, or overlaying on top of existing environments. Even voice, a lot of times with a lot of the original voice vendors, it was this rip and replace. Get rid of all your devices, change your infrastructure, train the model, train your users, set up profiles, relay out your warehouse, rebarcode everything, and relabel it with check digits and all those things. So even that initial lift with voice
Yeah,
could be
back to your
huge.
original point of like you're not starting net new. You're starting from a
Right,
warehouse that's 40 years old. So you got to
right,
try to like
exactly.
make it work with that.
Right.
Yeah.
And a workforce that maybe, yes, there's high turnover, but the ones that don't turn over, that are there still training the users, they can be kind of set in their ways in some organizations, right? Or some organizations as a whole can be very set in their ways. So um,
Yeah.
voice, again, as an assistant, one of the things that we're sort of waking up to in society is sort of this where you're having a conversation. There's a back and forth now. Like you have a conversation with ChatGPT and it remembers the last thing you said and the things before that. So you can refine even in that example where you say, is it going to rain this weekend? It says, oh, the Weekend album is coming out. You say, no, I was talking about the weather. You don't have to re-ask your question in a way where you're
Yeah.
processing it. You can refine the context. So we're a ways out. I think we're just a ways out, and I think that's true of most of these technologies from it being totally seamless, where you don't know that you're talking to an AI, or you don't know that you're reading something generated by AI. You know?
Yeah. So my next topic, which is this is another pretty far one out. I think you're probably gonna tell me it is, but speaking of seamless, so neural connectivity. I
Mhm.
know Elon Musk has Neuralink. I've been
Yeah.
playing around with some stuff that's more just like the ones you put in your head and use it for like focus and testing.
Yeah.
But what's your thoughts around the applicability of that technology and how that's going to change? And the biggest thing, to be honest with you, I'm excited about is like, people in my family that have certain diseases or end up in a
Hmm.
wheelchair, Parkinson's, ALS, it'd be awesome to be able to have like a link that shortcuts some of the problems that are happening as people's bodies
Totally.
degenerate. But in relation to the user and businesses, where do you see like the neural connectivity technology going?
Man, this is one of those dies on politics kind of things. Who owns the Neuralink? You know, and
Touche. That's good.
are you lending your Neuralink to a business, and who
Yeah.
owns the data created by that, and all of that? Does it have a memory chip as company data on an employee's Neuralink? And so there are so many technologies where we haven't even answered the first basic questions. Like drone delivery is one of these ones. It's sort of my favorite example in that it's going to be a while before we see drone delivery because it hasn't crashed into its first person yet, right? And all
Uh,
the liability discussions about whose fault that is, and what happens if drones fall out of the sky, and what's the legislation and the safety concerns, and what body is going to be responsible for setting the regulation of that and all of that, right? So as a technology, it's developing very rapidly. In the practical application, and especially in the use for workers and productivity, we are so far out from that. Like I have a device. This is literally over a decade old. Have you seen one of
yep.
these?
Yeah. We got a
Right.
couple of those nowadays.
So
Yeah.
so I don't think, you know, uh, installed Neuralink devices are going to
Yeah.
be the hot thing. Temporary use case kind of thing. Nothing where you have to have surgery to get
Just
it.
stick it in. So it's going to be more like this is one I got recently for this is mainly around, so
Oh,
it
there you
is
go.
it has sensors on it, and they
Yeah,
effectively are along your temporal lobes. They're picking up
yeah,
the brain signals and converting that into the ability to test focus and practice, like when you're doing meditation, or
sure.
practice and group
Meditation stuff.
meditation,
Yeah,
which is what I use it for. But it's interesting because you take that sensor array and you make 40 of those to go across your brain. And like you said,
yeah.
you put on the Apple Vision Pro 12 with the sensors,
Well,
and
dude,
yeah.
I'll tell you, this is interesting. So the Apple Vision Pro has incredible eye tracking, right? And so one of the things that it will nail it. If you're looking at something that is super small and you look at it and you click your fingers together, you'll hit it, right? But the brain takes a little while to get used to that. So like you'll be typing and you'll be jumping around with your eyes, but then you'll go to check what you're typing the way you've done the whole time you learned how to type,
Mhm.
and you'll type something completely different and lose track of where you were, and then you'll lose track, and then you got to back it up, and then you'll look to see if you're backing it out, but now you've lost focus on the backspace. And so it can be really really weird um, using that kind of tech. It can take a while to wrap your brain around that, right? Um, so I think Neuralink is one of those interesting things where uh, people will adapt. Now, can we adapt that in a usable way where there isn't just a simpler answer, like their eyes can see what you want them to do, and their hands can do the job that you're asking the brain and Neuralink to do. I think a lot of these things end up going with the lowest common denominator. They go with the simplest solution or minimum viable product kind of thing, where yes, it might be way more efficient to do these things over Neuralink, but there's a lot of liability. There's a data ownership. There's all of this stuff, and so it's just simpler to to keep using some of the
Just
technology
use a
that's more readily
keyboard.
available. Right. Yeah.
Uh,
It's like that. Yeah. It's awesome. You'd never have to use your hands, but you could just make a music keyboard
yeah.
and get roughly the
Uh,
same result.
Got it. I didn't have drones on my list for technology, so I'm gonna
Oh,
skip that
yeah.
one. Yeah,
I wouldn't.
I'm surprised.
Yeah,
Yeah, I feel
I
like
wouldn't.
that's old hat. The next one I did have is something that I've been following, and it's definitely complex, but quantum computing. And I don't know if you've seen this,
Hmm.
but IBM kludged together. I won't say kludged, built a kind of computer that has supposedly what I wrote this down in my notes.
The qubits.
1,121 qubits, which is
Yeah.
huge, and it's a couple different pieces. And there's a bunch of different other ones I know. Xanadu, Alibaba, a lot of Chinese
Hmm.
companies and firms are making this.
Yep.
There's a lot of U.S. companies, and the biggest question I have, and I was looking at this, how long until a quantum computer can crack a 256-bit AES? And I think you
Yeah.
need the number was 6,681 qubits. So I feel like we're still not there, but this is
Yeah.
what I feel like then the next like 5 to 10 years, most of our security is going to be worthless based on these quantum computers. But even more interesting to me is like, when will they figure out how to make it where it doesn't take a giant room? And people are like,
Right.
oh, it's always going to
Yeah.
take a giant room. I'm like, yeah, we said
Yeah.
that about computers 50 years ago. And now a computer is, this thing that's sitting on my desk and I can, more powerful than anything they had in a big room. But what's your
Yeah.
thoughts around quantum computing, the timelines for that and how that might actually impact
I,
us?
yeah. All right. So Moore's law, right? I think kind of has held up pretty well over this. We're still uncovering uh, a fundamental understanding of the capabilities of quantum computing and time crystals and all of this stuff that's being exposed by quantum computing. And so again, I think the security implications are interesting because you could crack stuff now through simpler means than getting a state-sponsored computer, quantum computer to throw at these things. And there's a lot of people who kind of, again, go with a basic level of security, and it's basically a keep out sign. One of the most interesting books I ever read was, I think it's called A Practical Guide to Lockpicking. And the whole first chapter is just an explanation of the concept of security, right? And that most people in America have a deadbolt on their door and a lock on the handle, and 3 feet from that, a big glass window, right?
Yeah.
So if the goal is to keep people out of your house, you get rid of the window, right? You get rid of all of your windows. But there's sort of a balance that everybody strikes between security and comfort, security and practicality, and that you want to be able to see the outside world and get some sunshine and all of that. So we all make sacrifices that way. Um, so I think that's probably even if they come up with a quantum computer and point it at encryption, how relevant is that going to be for people? Are they going to completely revamp their security schemes around quantum hacking and all of that? Probably not. Not for a while. So yeah, that's probably the furthest out, I think, of all these technologies that we're talking about. That one and Neuralink stuff, I think, are probably way out there from our
I
space.
got one last, so number 10,
Right.
which this may be with the quantum computing, hopefully not, because we would all like to be sooner. But I wrote down like green technology, sustainability.
Hmm.
I know for me, like a lot of things I think about is like, I look at like climate change and just the
Yeah.
overall growth of humanity and the things we consume, power we consume. And I've seen a lot of warehouses putting, solar arrays across the
Yeah.
roofs, which is a great way to offset a cost, especially as much as they consume.
Yeah.
What are you seeing around green technology? And, where do you think this is going to land in the next 5 to 10 years?
I think it's seeing a brilliant amount of focus. Um, and a lot of this has to do with sort of the public consciousness sort of making this big shift. I think COVID was a really healthy exercise for people in that it sort of broke people a bit of sort of that instant consumerism at any cost kind of thing. Um, you know, where you couldn't get something in 2 hours. And so you just had to learn to live with that. And it might take multiple days or multiple weeks, but if you wanted it, it was worth waiting for, kind of thing. I think that was, and I think it helped people fundamentally understand where their things come from, right? It opened up a dialogue about, well, we can't get that because it's made in another country, and ships aren't allowed to leave that country for months, right? And I think the world just had a love affair with logistics for 2 years, and I think that had a huge impact on the conversations that people started having about the impact of the things they want. They started to look at, you know, the way things were wrapped, you know, and the way food was processed, and the way, you know, microplastics leach into foods, and all of that. I think, yeah, this over the next couple of years, it's going to become one of those things like saying, is your accounting set up correctly? Like, you know, like in business, they have this thing called GAAP, generally accepted accounting practice. You will be expected to have an answer to this question of what are you doing to mitigate your environmental impact. We're lucky we're in software, right? But that
Yeah.
can come down to, you know, how are you making sure that you're traveling in a way that's conscious of your impact on the environment and all that. So
Yeah.
we're seeing that now. We're seeing that with some of the larger customers where they're expecting an answer from you on how you're going to either support or at least not drag down their environmental impact because somebody's asking them, right? So I think that's a 5.
Yeah, I look forward to seeing more of that too. All right,
Yeah.
those are my 10 questions, Justin. Thank you very much for walking
Yeah.
through with me today. Well, I guess if people want to find out more about you and or StayLinked, where would they go? I
Yeah,
know.
StayLinked.com is a great place. Find us on LinkedIn. I'm on there a lot.
Yeah,
But
I know. I definitely follow
yeah,
Justin if you're interested in seeing new technologies. He's always got cool videos coming
it's,
out. So thank you
yeah,
for
I've got
posting those. I definitely
a
appreciate it.
raging gadget habit. Yeah, just expressed all over LinkedIn. But
Awesome.
yeah, StayLinked.com, and if we can be of any help to anybody, please reach
Excellent.
out.
Well, thank you for joining me today and really appreciate it and have a good one. That's a wrap.
All right, man. Thanks.